So welcome back, John, to the stage. We have some time for some questions and comments before we go to a break. And please, during the break, have a chance to strap on the Oculus Rift. May well be coming to a home near you for about $300.
That's what the dev kit's $350 right
One of the most exciting increases in computing power and drop in prices in recent years. It's astonishing. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, Martin Howe. I'm a technology consultant and developer. Doug, you talked about Worldwide Telescope and referred to that quite extensively. As you know, I'm a big advocate of the software. I think it would be helpful perhaps to explain that it's a visualization tool that goes beyond astronomy. Perhaps you could give some examples of other data that you have that's available.
Yeah. So we, I didn't mention at TED, besides the space station flyover, actually the thing that got us to TED was another MIT project, iWire, which is a neural imaging project. They basically have this really cool game. If you haven't played it before, go to it's probably iwire.org, but it's Bing iWire, not Google. But if you do that, you'll find there's a game which basically allows you. It's a citizen science project to figure out the interconnectedness of neurons to then map out 3D structures. So we have these really high detailed 3D models of neurons. So one part of it is you can pull those into Worldwide Telescope into this kind of data viz mode. And so it's not necessarily astronomy specific. You can pull in other data sets into it and fly around. And I have to say, we had the scientists who didn't see VR or their stuff in VR until TED. They actually said, oh, it's great, over cocktails a couple months before TED, but then when they actually got to it, it's like, we didn't get a chance to see it until you mailed us at Oculus the week before TED, and they were all blown away. They said, yeah, we're going to use this in our collaboration, in our research. So you can pull in data sets like that. Now, astronomy is well-rounded because Worldwide Telescope has access to about a petabyte of data that Microsoft supplies. Some of it's mirroring off NASA sites and stuff. But you can also a ton of Earth-based data. So climate data, stuff like that. So stories that need about Earth science and geology. And one of the things, just on a total side note, but when I was on, you can take 3D spherical pictures, whether it's with a phone by scanning. There's a panorama mode on most smartphones, but there's also some cameras that take full dome images or video with GoPros, and you can play that back in VR. So those are all modes of interaction and that are really powerful. And Worldwide Telescope is one of the few software now, but it's going to be joined by a ton very soon, I'm sure.
There are questions? Yes.
I've enjoyed all the talks so far today. Two speakers I've noticed alluded to something that I don't agree with, and I just wanted to give you a chance to talk more about it. I've heard it inferred twice that the digital will replace the physical. So going to an art museum virtually will replace the actual experience of being in front of that artifact and that communion of person to object. I've also heard it said that it will get you excited about the visit, which I totally agree with, and also relive the experience, which I totally agree with. I'm from an art museum. I'm from the Eamon Carter Museum just down the street, so of course I have a particular point of view, but it is my experience that there's nothing that can replace that physical communion.
Did I speak that? I mean, I don't recall who may have said that the digital will replace the physical. I don't agree with it either. And for me, it's a little bit back to what Ford Bell was saying this morning. And actually, I've heard, my sense today is that there's been quite close implicit agreement among speakers. Milton has been talking a lot about the importance of whole body physical experience and the ways in which digital can enhance that. When it comes to art, I'm not a historian or an expert in art, but I can still remember when I first saw a real, as it were, live Van Gogh painting and realized for the first time, having seen countless images in books, that it's a three-dimensional object. That he's using paint which is like the waves on the sea to cause all kinds of effects that even a high-resolution 2D image can't really give you. And Ford this morning was talking about the value of authenticity. There's an anecdote that the late Stephen Jay Gould used to tell, or told at least once or twice, about the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, which was trying to cater better for disabled visitors, and in this case particularly for blind visitors. And it did a survey amongst blind people because it was considering producing a tangible, touchable model of one of the most famous historic aircraft, the first powered aircraft of the Wright brothers, in the collection. The question was, would this enhance your visit? You can't see the aircraft, but you'd be able to touch the model. And what they got back from this particular group of visitors was the following verdict. Yes, we would be happy to have and pleased to use an accurate touch model of this aircraft, so long as we know that when we do that, we're standing immediately beneath the real thing. So what does it mean for a person who can't see to stand immediately beneath a suspended Wright flyer? Well, it means that you're in the presence of the real thing. And you know you're in the presence of the real thing because you trust the museum not to lie to you. So there's something about authenticity, the real thing, which is very strong and may even transcend the ability to actually see it immediately. So I don't have much worry about that, and I do agree with you, and I think I was trying to make the point that what we're dealing with here is synergy and with added value, with getting new experiences, new ways of appreciating artworks, for example, that would require you to put a proverbial book on the wall if you were to do conventional museum interpretation. And we all know what happens to artworks. If you surround them with masses of text and photographs, you're diminishing the artwork unintentionally. So I think it's about both. It's not about one or the other.
Yeah, I'll just add. I think it probably might have been me that said that this done. No, that's fine. I was doing it to be a little provocative, but I think that it's just very important for the, when you mentioned the three-dimensionality of Van Gogh painting, if in VR you could see the shadows cast by a light source, and it would be indistinguishable from seeing the real thing. There are things you can do in VR, like you can get much closer than they'll ever allow you to get to. You could handle it. You could run your fingers over it. There's things like that we don't know what value that adds to the visitor. We don't know, and at Adler we have a very well-regarded astronomy collections of astronomy instrumentation, and a lot of times in meetings we were talking about, authenticity is everything, but ultimately it's a resource that you have to provide to your visitors in some way that's meaningful for them. And so, but I think it's a mistake just to assume that because it's authentic, of course people are going to keep coming just for that, because before you know it, there'll be things that will compete with authenticity that may, and maybe not today's culture, but in 2050's culture, they may not have the same meaning. Not to say that it's not important. I love that, and that example of being in the presence of something, I think, is a way a lot of people would express that connection with authentic things. But technology is going to enable new things, whether it's augmenting it, whether it's being able to interact with it in ways that you couldn't because of conservation issues and things like that. It's going to change that, and so I think it's just important to be aware of that, that's coming.
Could you talk about how you get data out of the VR, and also maybe how that data might communicate with other, like our mobile devices or computers, laptops, etc.? Like if a student is going to the museum collecting data in a science project, could they get that data out and do anything with it on their laptop or on their phone? And then also kind of how this could also be used in other contexts, like in a MOOC or something like that, where a professor lives in, University X, and people, could be in that classroom in a sense. Would this work in that kind of synchronous environment?
Yeah, well, data getting out. I mean, basically, like if I'm very familiar with Worldwide Telescope. It's the one thing that I know, can do this. But in Worldwide Telescope, for instance, I can create a tour, and it's just a show. It's like a flight through a 3D environment. So if this room were I wanted to show what this, and architectural walkthroughs are one of the obvious kind of uses of this technology. I could kind of map out my tour, and then I could share that path with you. And then if you're looking at it in virtual reality, you would see a very realistic rendering of that path that would respond to your head motion and your motion. If you're looking at it with a phone, you might see just a camera walking through a virtual space, and that would be that way to do it. So it depends on how what the end device is. Worldwide Telescope can also output files that can be 3D printed of planetary surfaces and so forth. So if one way to experience a mountain on Mars might be to look at it and do a flight around it in VR and see how big Olympus Mons is on Mars. Another way would be to print out a 3D object and either look at it with light or run your hands across it for visually impaired people. So there's that way of sharing. As far as using it as a component in distributed education, I think it definitely has the ability. Like if these were in everybody's houses or schools, you can imagine, okay, it's me, like in this case, we're going back and forth between a picture of me on the podium and then slides. But let's say the slides were a full dome immersive. I'm going to take you to Mars for 10 minutes or 5 minutes or a minute or whatever. That could be interspersed with other more traditional means of presentation. So I think that's kind of where I see it potentially happening. But the technology can enable all those ways, actually. None of that is sci-fi. It's all solvable problems.
Another comment back here and one up here as well.
Hey, Adam Smith with the Commemorative Air Force. We have 162 World War II airplanes that we fly, and I'm sort of interested in virtual reality because of the opportunity to give people the sensation of flying. And my Oculus Rift got delivered last week, and I've been waiting for it for like 5 months, and it finally arrived in the mail. And within about half an hour of plugging this into my laptop, I am literally sitting at my laptop screaming in my own living room. And the opportunity for me is really interesting because it's sort of beyond some of the things we've talked about earlier today, which is sort of learning environments. What I realize with my interaction with this thing so far is that it has the capability to trick my mind into some very deep emotions. So there's this game that is about falling, and you jump off skyscrapers, and you have the sensation of falling. And the game that made me scream was this one called where I totally believed there was a big spider on my hand, and so it has this. For me, this is great for what we're trying to do because that's it. I just wondered if you got any observations on that, this capacity to make you feel something and to stimulate an emotional reaction from people.
You want to go?
No.
Well, it's true. First of all, it's true. It's very true.
It is true. I mean, it is amazing that it doesn't take how quickly the mind, because I spent a lot of time in virtual reality to do these productions. At longest days were about 12 hours in VR with the headsets, just getting up to get drinks of water, go to the bathroom. But and luckily I was not in VR when I did that because that would not have worked. But the emotional, it's very, once you kind of buy into it, it's amazingly quick, and you'll give up a lot. Like I said, the first generation Oculus is incredibly low res, and I do this example that I take I have horrible eyesight. I take my glasses, and yet everything is still as immersive as is with my glasses. Resolution doesn't determine immersion. Immersion comes from our sense of being there. And so recreating those experiences that are primarily visual, obviously augmenting them with, if you can, tactile feedback with rumbling or whatever, and audio is another great technique. But it's very easy, and I think it's going to be exploited quickly to evoke emotional responses, right? So it's one thing to see something beautiful or horrific on 2D. A picture can communicate that really well. Movies even more so, and VR is kind of the ultimate of that. But I think that this idea of leaving screaming is going to be there's probably going to be a new term for that in it's like psycho virtual reality exhibits or something. But yeah, it's definitely a case that it's pretty easy to do.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Charles Cooper. Our organization worked with 77 school districts in the North Texas area, and we've pushed out and used augmented reality with Daiquiri and Erasmus and apps like that on the iPad. Do you guys have any like an outreach component through Oculus to public schools? Because I know with the Daiquiri apps and that kind of stuff, incredibly engaging for the students and the teachers, and it really makes the teachers' lives pretty nice when the kids are automatically engaged with the content. So do you have any sort of outreach, or do you have classrooms in mind
I should say I don't work for Oculus, but and Oculus, they just so people know, they were a Kickstarter company about 18 months ago, got bought by Facebook in March, and so they're still only in the developer market right now. So you can buy them. You can, you got one for you get on a waiting list for a month or so. I don't know. Obviously, I would be surprised if Facebook is not thinking about some educational markets and outreach type things, but they're the driver behind Oculus was almost entirely gaming, and Facebook has said in the acquisition that they're not going to change that. At least they're not going to publicly say they're changing that. So that's their direction. These other potential outreach things and educational ideas, I bet will come down the line, but I bet that will probably wait till they're past the development phase into the public release phase, which we don't know when that is. But there's a lot of competition right now, so I think there are people breathing down their necks, and they're going to really want to get this to market quickly. But I think they want to sort out all the technical issues so that people don't have their first exposure to VR and then run away from it because of the resolution or these other issues. But I would be surprised if they didn't do something, but it's not going to happen. It's not available now, and those sort of programs probably wouldn't be available until it's publicly released. And I would guess the next year, but I can't say exactly when that would be.
Yeah, Jeff?
Jeff Levine, just picking up on an earlier comment about whether new technologies would replace the museum experience. I don't know that that will happen because we'll always want to go see the Mona Lisa and stare at it directly. But I'm wondering if some of these technologies are so cumbersome or so involved that they might be distracting. In other words, Dr. Durant, looking at your flyover of the Depression era painting, I kind of wondered, what would I do first? Maybe I'd just be better off staring at the thing. One other aspect of that, I think there's a generational issue with these technologies. In other words, I'm sure my son would pick up on it pronto, but maybe you need to have tiers of devices or technologies for those that are less techno-savvy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, yeah, the little bit of video that I showed of the screen supporting the thing was shot in a completely amateur way, of course, by a visitor just thinking, oh, look, I can press this and I can press that, and then where's the sound coming from? I mean, this was not high production stuff, as you could tell. And I would agree with you. The point I would make is that the gallery is designed very much with the visitor who just wants to see the paintings in mind. So all you have to do to not have all this stuff on the screen is take a pace around it, and then you're looking at the painting uninterrupted and unencumbered. But then if you've looked at it for a while and you're, as one hopes, intrigued by it, then there are things you could do to begin to probe a little bit what it is. So it's designed to try and facilitate more than one method of access. When it comes to the individual, I mean, I have a kind of question which I think may already have been partly answered, but I'm curious about it. But I do think there is an issue in museums. We know one thing for sure, I think, about museum experiences in exhibitions and galleries, which is that generally speaking, most visitors get the most benefit from visits when they go in small social groups, whether it's a parent and some kids or a group of adults or a class or whatever. I think there's quite a lot of research that supports that. And when I see people, as you do now occasionally, walking around a gallery with their own handheld, sort of deeply immersed in the handheld and looking up at the wall occasionally, I'm ambivalent about that. I'm not clear that that's necessarily the best experience for them. So we need to guess what? We need to get smarter. And museums, I think, are right in the midst of this now about how you implement these digital technologies so that they're permissive of different kinds of use and enable social engagement of the sort that can often aid a visit. So I don't think we should pretend that this is a mature field where all of the optimal solutions are yet available. I think this is an early stage field where we're still feeling our way, and all we've got at the moment is some interesting experiments, as it were, out there, trying this, trying that, trying the other. It makes it a very exciting field, I think, in which to do new work, but we're on a learning curve about how to use these technologies. But my implicit question about, I mean, VR has had a prehistory, as it were. I can remember excitement about VR in the museum environment in the 1990s. And to be honest, as far as I can see, it didn't really go anywhere. I mean, it just sort of, and the story on the street, by which I mean amongst professionals at the time, of whom I was one, was, well, it's too individual, and in the end, we want exhibits that groups of people can come and do things with together. But you're implying that this will allow that too, is that right?
Right. Yeah, so, I mean,
I'm breaking the rule about conversation.
Not at
Oh,
all,
okay, sorry.
not at all.
no,
Please.
that's a good point, and that's a great point that I tried to make in my talk, that this has a history, VR has a history, and history in museums. I come from space science, so part of the drive, like when I think of where VR was in 1990, it certainly was there at some level, but like, when you look at Worldwide Telescope now, it has access to data at such high resolutions. When you look over these things, if you kind of allow yourself to be fooled by the resolution, the astronaut said, except for these kind of mistakes, that it was it was as realistic as it would have been had they been wearing something that would cover their head like that. And they are, right? You're in a space helmet and in an EVA, you actually don't have great fields of view. So part was the ability. Anything in VR in 1990 would look obviously not real. The R, it would be a lowercase r, not an uppercase r. So it would be it'd be a facsimile of reality that would be obviously, your brain would not be tricked into it. And the early prototypes that I had seen, just that never really amounted. And because the space science, especially where there was a lot of data, in order to render that requires data. It requires hardware capabilities didn't exist then. I've been talking more about the display, but of course beneath the display is some computer driving it. And the computers in 1990 were like the earliest planetarium, the one at Adler when we first got it was a evolution of a flight simulator from Evans and Sutherland, and it did one thing and did that okay. But when we tried to put space data into it, it just kind of, it was, you know, your $200 or $500 PC at the time would run rings around it in terms of how much it would look. And so, but VR has changed a lot in that respect. I think the other thing that Jeff mentioned was, that I just want to end with, is this idea of generations having different ways to access technology. I think is really critical. And and these social engagements are oftentimes not all peer groups. They're, you know, having old people to young people, and how do the old people want to learn or not feel foolish when they're, you know, and maybe it'd be a step ahead of the youngsters to be the facilitators. But one of the things, just a story I'll tell, is that I took the VR system in a tour to a seniors home and showed them this, and they were totally blown away by it, because the way you interact with it, you put the headset on, there's no joystick, there's no iPad, there's no trying to move something, you just move your head, and wherever your head looks, that's where the scene is. And they all said, this is amazing, they've been to space after you in the space station. And I actually think that these technologies create more, where the natural interactions are more powerful than other technologies, and therefore are really amenable to older generations.
And I love the quote that you were telling me about. Was it a woman who was 90 years old?
Yeah, 92-year-old woman who said that she remembers milk bottles being delivered by horse-drawn carriage when she was a kid, and now she feels like she's been to the International Space Station. So, yeah.
How about one last question or comment from behind? Thank
Hi,
you.
my name's Michelle. I'm with the Fort Worth Library, and I just had a question for Dr. Durant. So if you could please tell us a little bit about the Science Festival movement, and about how participants of all ages have been able to use digital technology to really interact with their environment and connect with their community on a whole. We have a program with the Fort Worth Library that's called Worth Reading, and we have participants who are supposed to engage with the community in a larger scale, you know, beyond just the walls of the library. So if you could talk a little bit about some of your favorite examples.
This is a really dangerous question for me to be given at this stage. So, I mean, science festivals I'm very heavily involved in and a huge enthusiast for. So Red Flag, I'll try and persuade you and anybody else who's interested to start one. They tend to specialize in live events. I mean, a lot of that then gets posted on the web or whatever, but they tend to specialize in live events. Some of those events have been digitally enabled, and my favorite example is and I'll just use one because otherwise I'll get into trouble with Milton again, and is that the first science festival in the Bay Area, 3 years ago now, they decided to experiment by linking a large group of Bay Area kids, I think sort of middle school age kids, with a similar group of similarly aged kids in Italy who were attending an Italian science festival. And you might wonder why they would do that, since they weren't using Google Translate. The Italian kids didn't speak English, and the Bay Area kids didn't speak Italian. But the program involved a competition for the kids to mime science concepts to each other. So the idea was which group would be best at working out what the science concept was that the other kids were miming. And this event was hugely successful with one really interesting aspect, which is that there are lots of adults, as you can imagine, involved in orchestrating this on both sides of the Atlantic. The adults involved didn't have the faintest idea what was going on at any point. But the kids got on together and understood each other perfectly well. But that's the kind of event, real-time linking of two groups. We've talked at several times today about overcoming the inconvenience of physical location. And to me, that was just a wonderful example of taking two learning groups from different countries and letting them enjoy, in this case, their own ability to mime science digitally.
Great. Well, please thank Doug Roberts and John Durant. Great panel.